My name is Miranda Jane, and I am 31 years old. 3 weeks before my sister's baby shower, I was standing in my warehouse inspecting a shipment of white Phalaenopsis orchids. My hands were dusted with green floral foam, so when my phone buzzed on the metal staging table, I tapped the screen with my knuckle. It was a text from my younger sister, Victoria. 5 lines of text. That was all it took to sever a lifetime of trying to be the good daughter. Mom and I were talking, and we just think it is best if you do not come to the shower. You have been so stressed with your corporate grind lately, and I really just need to protect my peace and keep the aesthetic positive right now. Love you. I set the delicate orchid down on the stainless steel counter. I wiped my hands on my denim apron and stared at the screen for maybe 10 seconds, which does not sound long until you are the one counting the beats of your own heart. Victoria was 26, pregnant with her first child, married to a man whose family wealth was older and louder than ours, and she had just uninvited me from an event I had secretly paid for. 10 minutes later, my mother Evelyn called to finish the job. "Do not cause a scene about this, Miranda," she said. She sounded like she was ordering a salad. "You know how you get. You just do not blend with Carter's mother's tennis circle. Be a good sister and stay home." She hung up before I could reply. She did not know the receipt sitting in my top desk drawer was for $65,000. She did not know I had signed the contract for the Alpine Country Club Grand Ballroom. And she certainly did not know that the venue had an ironclad transfer clause with my name on it. Welcome back to Morning Revenge. This is a place where we share real stories about toxic family dynamics, unspoken boundaries, and the exact moments we finally stop paying for their approval. Drop a comment with your age and let me know where you are listening from today. To understand how we reached that breaking point, you have to understand the ecosystem we grew up in. Alpine, New Jersey is a town of gated driveways, manicured lawns, and a highly competitive high society culture. Here, your worth is measured by how effortless your wealth appears. Milestones like baby showers are not family gatherings. They are grand, performative social exhibitions designed to showcase personal status and flawless lineage. In my family, there were 2 daughters. Victoria was the aesthetic. I was the utility. Victoria fit the mold perfectly. Pastel cardigans, perfect blowouts, an inherent ability to charm country club members without ever saying anything of substance. I was the one who built a hospitality and luxury event design firm from scratch. I wore tailored suits. I worked 60-hour weeks. My parents tolerated my success, but they never celebrated it. My independence challenged their vanity. They wanted a daughter who looked good in holiday portraits, not one who negotiated vendor contracts. When Victoria announced her pregnancy 6 months ago, the first thing my mother did was panic about the baby shower. Carter's family, the affluent in-laws, expected a certain standard. Victoria demanded the Alpine Country Club. She wanted a sit-down luncheon for 100 guests, custom monogrammed linens, and a harpist. My parents could not afford it. They had the zip code, but their cash was tied up in the relentless grinding maintenance of their facade. I watched my father Charles pace the kitchen one Sunday afternoon, massaging his temples, trying to figure out which investments he could quietly liquidate without Carter's father noticing the strain. So I fixed it. I always fixed it. I met with the Alpine Country Club management the next morning. I paid the $65,000 invoice in full through my corporate entity. I handled the catering deposit. I secured the grand ballroom. I did it as a surprise gift, a quiet offering of financial grace. I foolishly hoped this gesture would finally earn me a genuine seat at their table, a moment where they would look at me and see someone worth keeping around. I sat in my chic, minimalist office that afternoon and ran my fingers over the embossed gold logo on the Alpine Club contract. The paper was heavy, expensive. I tucked it into my file cabinet, waiting for the right moment to reveal my contribution. But a week later, the narrative shifted and the trap began to set itself. Victoria called a family dinner at a local French bistro to celebrate her registry. She arrived wearing a designer maternity dress, glowing with that specific brand of toxic humility that only exists in wealthy suburbs. The smell of truffle oil and roasted garlic hung in the air as she raised her sparkling cider. She announced that a mystery luxury sponsor had secured the Alpine Club for her. She smiled across the table, her eyes practically shining with self-importance. "I just know it was Carter's parents," she whispered, leaning in like she was sharing a state secret. "Sylvia has always said I was the daughter she never had. They are just keeping it a secret to be classy." I sat at the end of the table. I watched my mother nod in eager agreement, her relief palpable. She did not want to correct Victoria. She preferred the lie. Letting the wealthy in-laws take the credit made our family look better by association. My father raised his glass, offering a silent toast to an illusion. I kept my mouth shut. I cut my steak, chewing slowly, watching them build a fantasy on top of my bank account. I did not know then that my silence was handing them the shovel they would use to dig their own social graves. The fiction of the secret benefactor settled over my family like a warm, expensive blanket. For the next 2 weeks, I watched my mother and sister wrap themselves in it, content to live inside a lie because it elevated their social standing. But planning an event on the scale of the Alpine Country Club Grand Ballroom requires actual labor, not just wishful thinking. Someone has to choose the layouts, approve the floral cascades, and finalize the lighting design. Since I held the contract, I decided to offer my professional services, putting aside the secret of the funding to simply play the role of the supportive older sister. That decision brought me to my parents' house on a crisp Sunday evening. Their property in Alpine sits behind wrought iron gates, featuring a sweeping driveway lined with imported weeping willows. The house looks like a pristine museum from the street, designed to project an image of effortless generational wealth. Inside, however, the atmosphere always feels as sterile and tense as a doctor's waiting room. I walked through the front doors carrying a heavy linen-bound design portfolio. I had spent 3 late nights at my warehouse assembling a physical mood board specifically curated for Victoria. I did not print out a standard digital file. I wanted to give her a tactile experience, a taste of the high-end luxury my firm provided to our elite clients. My board included physical swatches of hand-dyed Italian silk ribbons, pressed petals from rare hydrangeas, and thick embossed cardstock featuring custom calligraphy. It was a masterpiece of soft elegance, designed to bridge the gap between her tastes and my expertise. I found them in the formal dining room. The good silver was polished and set. The scent of roasted rosemary chicken and expensive lemon furniture polish hung heavy in the air. My father, Charles, sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, watching a golf tournament on his tablet with the volume muted, actively ignoring the women in his house. My mother, Evelyn, was obsessing over a draft of the seating chart. Victoria sat beside her, draped in a blush pink cashmere lounge set, holding court as the glowing center of attention. I took my seat across from my sister and placed the linen portfolio on the polished wood. The brass clasp made a solid, satisfying click as I opened it, revealing the curated textures and floral sketches inside. I explained how we could drape the silk across the head table and use the hydrangeas to soften the grand chandeliers of the ballroom. Victoria stared at the board for a long moment. She did not reach out to touch the silk. She did not admire the custom watercolor sketches. Instead, she let out a soft, breathy sigh, a sound she had practiced for maximum passive-aggressive sympathy. "This is very you, Miranda," she said, tilting her head. I kept my hands resting flat on the edge of the table. "What does that mean, Victoria? It is just so structured, so rigid." She reached across the mahogany table. Her perfect acrylic nails caught the edge of my heavy portfolio. With a casual, thoughtless push, she slid my custom board aside. The metal corner of my binder scraped against the expensive wood. a harsh sound that made my jaw tighten. She picked up her own tablet and placed it squarely in the empty space she had just cleared. She tapped the screen, bringing up a digital collage she had saved on social media. It was a generic, mass-produced collection of pastel balloon arches, plastic teddy bear centerpieces, and trendy neon signs. It was the kind of basic aesthetic you could purchase in a prepackaged kit online. "I just feel like your designs are too much of a corporate workhorse vibe," Victoria continued, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "You have this whole independent grind mindset, and it translates into your work. It is too sharp, too masculine. It stresses me out just looking at it. I need a soft maternal aesthetic for my photos. The country club ladies expect a certain grace, not a corporate board meeting." I looked at the generic balloons on her screen, then down at the rare imported silk she had just shoved out of her way. The dismissal of my decade of hard work, the total disregard for my professional expertise, stung with a familiar, localized pain. In the wealthy enclaves of northern New Jersey, there is a toxic culture of enforced positivity. Everything must look flawless, easy, and unbothered. If you work hard, if you show ambition or grit, you are considered crass. Wealth must appear magical and unearned. My very existence as a self-made woman shattered their illusion. I reminded them of the labor they tried so desperately to hide behind their gates. By labeling my work as sharp and stressful, Victoria was weaponizing that culture against me. My mother chimed in, adjusting her cashmere wrap. "Your sister is right, darling. You do tend to bring a rather severe energy into the room. It is just your nature. You work so hard running your little business, you forget how to just be pleasant and soft. The aesthetic for the shower needs to be flawless, Miranda. We cannot have anything looking tense." They did not just dislike my design proposal, they disliked me. They viewed my survival skills, my independence, and my drive as character flaws that ruined their perfect family portrait. I did not raise my voice. I did not point out that my little business was currently bankrolling the very room she planned to fill with cheap plastic teddy bears. Showing emotion in this house was a losing game. The moment you display hurt or anger, they label you as unstable and use it to justify their cruelty. I simply reached across the table, closed my linen portfolio, and secured the brass clasp. "You are right," I said, my voice smooth and hollow. "It is your day. You should use the digital mood board. I will step back from the creative planning." Evelyn smiled a tight expression of relief. "Thank you for understanding, dear. It really is for the best." The old tension regarding my involvement in the planning was resolved. I was officially shut out of the creative process. I stood up, gathering my empty salad plate and my heavy portfolio, deciding it was easier to retreat than to sit there and swallow their insults. I walked through the swinging door into the massive chef's kitchen to leave my plate in the sink. The heavy door swung back on its hinges, stopping just short of closing completely. The sound of running water from the faucet was quiet enough that I could still hear the dining room clearly. I heard Victoria lower her voice to a theatrical whisper, leaning closer to our mother. "Honestly, Mom, I am glad she backed off. She just brings this heavy, dark energy everywhere she goes." "I know, sweetie," Evelyn hummed in agreement. "She is just difficult." "What if she ruins the vibe at the shower?" Victoria continued, her voice tightening with manufactured anxiety. "Sylvia is bringing the club president and all the board members. Miranda always wears those dark suits and stands in the corner judging everyone. She does not fit in with Carter's family. I cannot have her negative energy stressing me out in front of my guests. It is bad for the baby." I stood frozen at the marble kitchen island. The cold water ran over my hands, pooling in the stainless steel basin. "We will handle it, Victoria," my mother whispered back, the tone of a conspirator protecting her prized asset. "We will make sure your day is exactly what you want, unbothered and perfect." I turned off the faucet. The sudden silence in the kitchen felt heavy, suffocating. I dried my hands on a linen towel, feeling the rough texture against my damp skin. They were not just criticizing my lifestyle anymore, they were actively viewing my physical presence as a threat to their social climbing. Victoria was planting the seed, building a case to erase me entirely from the picture, and my mother was watering it. I picked up my portfolio and walked out the back door without saying goodbye, stepping into the cool night air. The text message officially revoking my invitation would arrive a few days later, but standing in that kitchen, listening to them plot my exile, the final trace of my familial guilt evaporated in the dark. 3 weeks before the baby shower, the reality of the Alpine Country Club event was taking physical shape inside my design warehouse. The space is a cavernous, temperature-controlled industrial loft filled with floor-to-ceiling steel shelving. It smells perpetually of damp moss, cut stems, and cold metal. I built this company by understanding the exact mechanics of luxury. My high-net-worth clients pay me not merely to throw a party, but to curate an alternate universe where everything appears flawless and effortless. They do not want to see the labor. They only want the result. That Tuesday afternoon, the warehouse was a hive of quiet, focused activity. My team was assembling the structural frames for the floral arches Victoria demanded for the ballroom entrance. We were checking the stability of welded poles that would soon be wrapped in hundreds of imported blooms. I wore a gray cashmere sweater and heavy work boots, holding a clipboard ticking off the inventory arriving from the wholesale markets. Every detail had to be precise, not for my professional portfolio, but because I still harbored the stubborn, foolish belief that delivering perfection might finally buy my way into my own family. I walked away from the noisy loading dock toward the staging table where the specialty shipments rested. Inside a temperature-regulated cooler box lay the focal point of the entire room design: a dozen white Phalaenopsis orchids. I had specifically imported them from a boutique grower in Holland at $400 a stem. These were destined for the head table, meant to frame where my sister and her husband Carter would sit. I carefully lifted one of the stems from the crate. The petals were thick, cool to the touch, and unblemished. They felt like heavy, raw silk against my fingertips. I was inspecting the delicate curve of the green stem, planning the exact angle of its placement in the crystal vase, when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I pulled the device out, resting the heavy base of the phone in my palm. The screen illuminated the dim warehouse aisle. A new message notification flashed across the glass. It was a text from Victoria. I swiped the screen open, expecting a question about the lunch menu, or perhaps a complaint about her maternity dress fitting. Instead, I found a dense block of text that stopped the breath in my throat. "Hey Miranda, Mom and I were talking after the dinner last week, and we think it is best if you do not come to the shower. You have been so stressed with your corporate grind lately, and I really need to protect my peace. I want this day to be about harmonious aesthetic alignment. You always bring this negative, stressful energy into the room, and that is not good for the baby. I know you will understand. Love you." The old conflict, the lingering, painful tension of whether I would ever fit into their high society image, evaporated in a single instant. I did not fit. I was officially exiled, banished from the very room I was currently bleeding my own resources to decorate. I stood frozen on the concrete floor. The cold air from the floral cooler washed over my face, raising goosebumps on my arms. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. A fine, uncontrollable tremor shook my fingers, vibrating through my wrists. The $400 orchid quivered in my grip. My first instinct was violent and sharp. I wanted to crush the delicate flower, to snap the green stem in half and hurl it against the cinder block wall. I wanted to destroy something beautiful because they had just destroyed me. But the discipline of a decade in hospitality held me back. I took a slow, uneven breath, pulling the scent of damp earth deep into my lungs. I carefully, meticulously laid the pristine white petals back onto the soft tissue paper inside the cooler. I let go of the stem swiftly, making sure I would not bruise the fragile bloom with my shaking hands. The sheer audacity of her message felt like a physical weight pressing against my ribs. harmonious aesthetic alignment. She was using trendy internet therapy speak to cut me out of a major family milestone. In the wealthy enclaves of northern New Jersey, the phrase negative energy is a weapon. It is what status-obsessed people call any emotion that is not shiny, compliant, and photogenic. They did not just want to exclude me. They wanted to sanitize their environment, erasing the daughter who actually worked for a living so they could pretend their generational wealth was innate and unbothered. I walked away from the staging area, my boots echoing in the cavernous space. I passed the stacks of custom-embroidered linen napkins I had paid for out of my own business accounts. I walked past the crates of crystal charger plates I had rented under my corporate name. My sister believed her affluent mother-in-law, Sylvia, was footing the bill. Victoria thought she was untouchable, wrapped in the protective funding of the elite class. She had no idea she was standing on a floor I built, preparing to eat off plates I provided, surrounded by flowers I bought. The hypocrisy tasted like copper in the back of my throat. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove I was worthy of their pride. I quietly paid their debts. I smoothed over their financial anxieties. I played the reliable, invisible utility player so they could shine in the country club sun. And my reward was an electronic dismissal delivered on a random Tuesday afternoon. The text message was a clear directive from my sister, but the opening line haunted me. Mom and I were talking. I needed to know where the rot stopped. I needed to know if this was solely Victoria's cruel vanity, or if the foundation of my family was entirely corrupted. Did my mother, the woman who raised me, actually sit in her pristine kitchen and agree to bar me from a celebration to protect a party theme? The agonizing question of parental loyalty hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I leaned against a steel shelving unit, staring blindly at the concrete floor, and dialed my mother's cell phone number. I brought the device to my ear. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. With every electronic chime, a desperate, childish hope fluttered in my chest. I wanted her to answer and sound horrified. I wanted her to claim Victoria was acting out of pregnant hormonal stress and reassure me that of course her eldest daughter belonged at the event. I wanted, for the first time in my 31 years, for a parent to defend me. The ringing stopped. The line clicked open. The faint, elegant sound of classical piano music and the quiet clinking of porcelain teacups filtered through the speaker. Evelyn answered the phone with a bright, airy tone, entirely oblivious to the storm she was about to navigate. "Hello, darling," my mother chimed. Her voice floated through the speaker, buoyant and melodic, underscored by the gentle clinking of fine porcelain and the faint notes of a classical piano. She was likely having afternoon tea at the local club, surrounded by women who spoke exclusively in veiled compliments and real estate values. "Mom?" I started, my tone tight, scraping against the back of my throat. "Victoria just sent me a text message. She told me I am not allowed to attend the baby shower." A heavy sigh filtered through the receiver. It was not a gasp of shock. It was the weary, practiced exhale of a woman inconvenienced by reality. Evelyn had spent her entire adult life curating our family like a high-end art gallery. In her mind, parenting was merely an exercise in public relations. She managed optics, not emotions. "Miranda, please," she murmured, the warmth instantly vanishing from her cadence, replaced by a rigid managerial coolness. "Let us not make a scene out of this. Your sister is very sensitive right now. We all just need you to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I repeated the word, tasting like ash. She banned me from a major family milestone because my energy does not match her party theme. "You have to admit you can be quite imposing," Evelyn countered smoothly, falling into her familiar enabler script. "You are always wrapped up in your corporate logistics. You carry this heavy, serious demeanor. Victoria simply wants a soft, harmonious environment for the baby. It is her special time. You need to respect her boundaries." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the freezing steel rack of the floral cooler. The physical chill grounded me, preventing the room from spinning. The irony of her demanding I respect boundaries while simultaneously trampling over my basic dignity was staggering. "She is kicking me out to protect a photo op, Mom, and you are letting her." "I am keeping the peace," she snapped back, a flash of genuine irritation breaking through her polished veneer. "Carter's mother, Sylvia, is bringing the entire country club board. These are important people, Miranda. They expect a certain grace. You do not blend with that crowd. You always insist on wearing those dark tailored suits, looking like you are about to audit someone. It makes people uncomfortable." There it was, the raw, unfiltered truth. My independence was an embarrassment. My refusal to play the role of a docile, pastel-clad socialite was a liability to their carefully constructed suburban dynasty. "Just send a nice gift," Evelyn instructed, her voice returning to its breezy, detached baseline. "Something from the silver registry. A generous gesture will smooth everything over. Show them you support her even from afar." I stood in the dim warehouse, clutching the phone, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my generosity. The thousands of dollars in imported linens, the crystal plates, the rare blooms. I was already funding the entire spectacle, operating as the invisible bedrock beneath their fragile vanity. And she was instructing me to buy a silver spoon to apologize for my existence. "I have to go, darling," Evelyn continued, oblivious to the silence stretching on my end of the line. "Pierre is waiting for me at the boutique. I am picking up my outfit for the shower. It is a stunning vintage Chanel suit, ivory boucle, $2,000, but worth every penny for the portraits. I want to look flawless when Sylvia's friends arrive. We will talk next week." The line went dead. A hollow dial tone echoed in my ear. I lowered the phone slowly, letting my arm drop to my side. The ambient noise of the workspace rushed back in, broken only by the low hum of the refrigeration units holding the flowers. For 31 years, I had carried a heavy, bruised hope inside my chest. It was a stubborn, childish belief that if I just worked harder, if I became successful enough, reliable enough, generous enough, my parents would eventually wake up and defend me. I thought my utility would eventually earn their loyalty. That hope did not shatter with a dramatic crash. It simply dissolved, calcifying into cold, hard dust. The systemic betrayal was absolute. My mother had weighed her eldest daughter's heartbreak against a photo opportunity in a Chanel suit, and the suit won. They prioritized the golden child's superficial aesthetic over my actual presence. I did not cry. The tears I had shed in my childhood bedrooms, begging for a fraction of the affection Victoria received, effortlessly belonged to a different person. The woman standing on the concrete floor of the luxury design warehouse felt no sorrow. I felt a profound, chilling clarity. The dynamic was permanently fixed. I was the scapegoat, the corporate workhorse, the wallet. I was useful to them only as long as I remained invisible. I walked back to my drafting desk. The thick, linen-bound Alpine Country Club contract rested exactly where I had left it. The heavy paper bore my signature, binding the venue, the catering, and the elite staff to my corporate entity. A sudden, sharp impulse flared in my mind. I could pick up the phone right now, call the general manager, and cancel the entire event. I could demand a refund, leaving Victoria and Evelyn to face Sylvia and the country club board with an empty room and a humiliating scandal. It would be swift. It would be devastating. But as I traced my finger over the gold-embossed logo on the contract, a different strategy took root. A calculating precision replaced my initial fury. Canceling now would give them 3 weeks to scramble. Charles could liquidate his stock portfolio, take out a high-interest loan, and buy the room back. They would spin a narrative of a cruel, jealous sister trying to ruin a pregnancy, and they would play the victims. They would survive the social fallout. I did not want them to survive it. I wanted them to own it. If I kept my leverage a total secret, they would continue walking blindly down the path they had chosen. They would keep bragging to their elite friends. Victoria would keep posting her smug updates. Evelyn would keep polishing her expensive outfit. They would build their towering monument of arrogance higher and higher, entirely supported by a foundation they did not realize was rigged to collapse. I opened my desk drawer and placed the contract carefully inside, sliding the metal track shut with a definitive click. I locked the drawer and slipped the small brass key into my apron pocket. The baby shower was no longer a family milestone. It was a trap, and I was going to let them walk all the way to the center of it. I pulled out a leather-bound notebook and began sketching revised logistics for my upcoming corporate clients, letting the repetitive motion of the graphite pencil focus my mind. The discipline of my profession is rooted in anticipating disaster. When a vendor fails, when a shipment is delayed, you do not panic. You pivot. You assess the structural weakness, and you reallocate resources. I was applying this exact methodology to my own bloodline. Evelyn's voice echoed in my memory. You do not blend with that crowd. She was right, though not in the way she intended. The women in her circle operated on polite fiction. They smiled to your face while calculating your net worth. They weaponized passive aggression, burying their cruelty under layers of pastel chiffon and social etiquette. I operated in the physical world. I built tangible things. I negotiated hard contracts with steel fabricators and boutique flower farms. I dealt in leverage binding agreements and immutable facts. My mother and sister were playing a game of social optics, unaware they had stepped onto a battlefield governed by corporate law. The financial reality of the Alpine Club event was staggering. $65,000 covered the grand ballroom rental, the custom menu featuring imported truffles and wild-caught sea bass, the string quartet, the valet service, and the premium open bar for 100 guests. It was a small fortune wired directly from my business operating account. My father, Charles, was currently sitting in his study, massaging his temples, believing a wealthy phantom was footing this massive bill. He thought his pristine reputation was safe. He thought his youngest daughter had successfully charmed her way into a high society bailout. I locked the warehouse for the evening, turning off the heavy industrial lights section by section. The massive space plunged into darkness, leaving only the red glow of the exit signs. I walked out to the parking lot, the crisp New Jersey air biting at my cheeks. The skyline in the distance glittered with cold indifference. Driving back to my townhouse, the silence in the car felt expansive. I did not turn on the radio. I let the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt anchor my thoughts. The internal shift I experienced today was permanent. The agonizing desperation for their approval, the constant draining effort to mold myself into a shape they might finally love, was gone. It had been surgically removed by Evelyn's casual dismissal. In its place was a fierce, protective armor. I was no longer a rejected daughter seeking validation. I was a senior executive managing a volatile asset. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, vibrating against the plastic. It was an automated calendar reminder. Sunday family brunch at the country club dining room. Carter's parents were scheduled to attend. It was an unavoidable social obligation, a monthly performance where we all pretended to be a cohesive unit over overpriced mimosas. I stared at the glowing screen. A few hours ago, the thought of sitting across from them would have filled me with anxious dread. Now the prospect felt entirely different. I was holding a live wire, waiting to see exactly who would reach out and grab it. Sunday morning arrived with crisp, stinging clarity. The Ridgewood Estate dining room was a sanctuary of vaulted glass ceilings, velvet upholstery, and the persistent hum of orchestrated wealth. The air smelled of roasted espresso and rich hollandaise sauce. I walked toward the private alcove our family reserved on the third Sunday of every month, my heels sinking slightly into the thick woven carpet. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and simple slacks, a conscious choice to remain an observer in a space designed for performers. The monthly brunch was an ironclad obligation. It was the arena where my parents maintained their precarious alliance with Carter's family. Sylvia Carter's mother sat at the center of the semicircular booth, radiating the kind of old money confidence my mother spent decades trying to emulate. Sylvia wore a subtle tweed jacket, her posture rigid, her gaze sweeping the room with casual authority. Beside her sat Carter, handsome and perpetually unbothered, nodding along to whatever my father was saying about the municipal golf committee. I took the empty chair at the far end of the table, the furthest point from the gravitational center. A waiter immediately poured ice water into my crystal goblet. I picked up the menu, studying the gold foil lettering, while the conversation around me settled into its familiar, shallow rhythm. Evelyn laughed a fraction too loud at a mundane observation Sylvia made regarding the weather. The desperation to belong rolled off my parents in invisible waves, a silent current I had spent my entire life trying to swim against. Victoria arrived 15 minutes late, ensuring a theatrical entrance. She glided into the alcove wearing a flowing cream dress, her hand resting delicately on her slight bump. The table fell silent to accommodate her arrival. She greeted Sylvia with an exaggerated embrace, pressing her cheek against the older woman's shoulder before offering my mother a similar, though slightly less enthusiastic greeting. She did not look at me. The text message from Tuesday hung in the space between us, an invisible barrier she erected and expected me to honor without question. The waiter distributed our plates. Poached eggs, smoked salmon, silver carafes of fresh orange juice. The clinking of heavy silverware against fine porcelain provided a rhythmic backing track to the polite chatter. I sliced my meal with deliberate precision, keeping my eyes focused on the table setting. I was there strictly to witness the architecture of their delusion, to see how deep the roots of this specific lie managed to grow. Halfway through the meal, Victoria set her linen napkin beside her plate and offered a soft, practiced sigh. The sound was a signal, a familiar cue that demanded the table's undivided attention. She reached across the white tablecloth and gently placed her manicured hand over Sylvia's wrist. The older woman paused a forkful of salmon, hovering inches from her mouth. "I just have to say something." Victoria began, her voice shimmering with manufactured emotion. "I know we agreed to keep the planning details quiet, but I cannot sit here and pretend I am not overwhelmed by how lucky I am." She looked deeply into Sylvia's eyes, projecting an image of profound, humbling gratitude. The Alpine Country Club Victoria continued letting the prestigious name hang in the air for maximum impact. When I saw the confirmed booking for the grand ballroom, I actually cried. "You are the most generous, secret angel, Sylvia. I know you wanted to stay anonymous and let Carter take the credit, but I just had to thank you in person. You are giving this baby the most beautiful welcome into the world." I stopped chewing. I kept my gaze fixed on the rim of my water glass, watching the condensation bead and slide down the crystal. I waited for the confusion to set in. I waited for the matriarch of Carter's family to furrow her brow, to politely correct the assumption, to clarify that she had not written a check for $65,000. Sylvia blinked. A micro-expression of genuine bewilderment flashed across her features. Her eyes darted briefly to her husband, who was currently occupied with his coffee cup, oblivious to the exchange. In a fraction of a second, I watched a complex social calculus play out behind Sylvia's polite exterior. In this specific stratum of society, rejecting public gratitude for a lavish gift is a dangerous maneuver. It invites questions. It suggests financial restraint. It implies you are not the magnanimous figure everyone assumes you are. The pristine culture of our wealthy enclave dictates that you never create friction at a Sunday brunch. You never make a pregnant woman feel foolish. And above all, you never turn down an opportunity to look like royalty. Sylvia's rigid posture softened. The initial confusion vanished, replaced by a smooth, maternal smile. She turned her hand over, giving Victoria's fingers a gentle squeeze. "Oh, sweetheart," Sylvia purred, her voice dripping with faux humility. "We just want you and the baby to have the very best. It is our pleasure, Truly, the lie cemented itself into reality right before my eyes. The older woman accepted the praise for a fortune she did not spend. She draped herself in the credit for my labor, my capital, and my sacrifice, simply because the alternative was too awkward to navigate. Charles beamed. My father leaned forward, his face flushed with the pride of a man who believed he had successfully secured his family's position in the local aristocracy. He picked up his champagne flute, the orange liquid swirling violently against the glass. To Sylvia, Charles announced, his voice carrying a booming, obsequious warmth. To your unmatched generosity, we are so incredibly blessed to blend our families. Evelyn raised her glass immediately, echoing the sentiment. Carter smiled, looking pleased that his mother was handling the heavy lifting. Victoria beamed, radiating the smug satisfaction of a woman who believed she held the world on a string. 4 crystal flutes met in the center of the table with a bright crystalline chime. I sat motionless at the far end of the booth. My mimosa remained untouched on the tablecloth. Nobody looked in my direction. Nobody noticed the silence radiating from my chair. They were entirely captivated by their own reflection in Sylvia's stolen generosity. The old conflict regarding the mystery benefactor was permanently laid to rest. I now knew exactly who Victoria believed was funding her dream, and I knew exactly how willing her in-laws were to play along. But as I watched Sylvia sip her cocktail, basking in the unearned admiration of my sycophantic parents, a new, terrifying reality crystallized in my mind. I now possessed a piece of information so volatile it could level their entire social standing. The situation was no longer a simple domestic dispute between 2 sisters. The blast radius had just expanded exponentially. If I pulled the funding and canceled the venue, the ensuing chaos would not just ruin a photo opportunity. It would not just embarrass my mother and father. It would publicly expose Sylvia as a fraud. When the truth emerged that the event was actually funded by the banished corporate workhorse sister, Sylvia would have to explain to her elite tennis circle why she sat at a public brunch and accepted credit for a charity she did not provide. The humiliation would be catastrophic. The wealthy in-laws would lose face in front of their peers, a cardinal sin in this zip code. The resulting anger would shatter the fragile alliance between our families, causing a ripple effect that could threaten Victoria's marriage itself. I picked up my linen napkin, folded it with deliberate precision, and set it beside my plate. I looked at the 5 people laughing together, building their towering monument of arrogance on a foundation that legally belonged to me. The power resting in my pocket felt heavy, cold, and thrilling. The trap was set, and they had just handed me the match. The final week leading up to a luxury event is a masterclass in controlled panic. In the hospitality industry, the last few days are when the fragile illusions of perfection are most vulnerable to reality. Weather shifts, vendors cancel, and supply chains fracture. My job is to stand in the space between the disaster and the client, absorbing the impact so they never see the cracks. I have spent my entire career perfecting the art of the seamless pivot. I know exactly how much tension a contract can hold before it snaps. 5 days before the baby shower, the weather in northern New Jersey turned bitter. A cold rain lashed against the high windows of my design warehouse, blurring the wealthy suburban skyline into a gray smear. I sat at my drafting table, a cup of black coffee cooling beside my laptop, reviewing the final structural load-bearing equations for a corporate gala I was managing the following month. My cell phone illuminated on the metal desk. The caller identification displayed the main office number for the Alpine Country Club. I picked up the device and accepted the call. The voice on the other end belonged to Brenda, the lead internal coordinator for the venue. Her tone carried the specific clipped anxiety of a hospitality professional preparing to deliver bad news to a high-net-worth client. "Good morning, Miranda." Brenda began, her words rushing together slightly. "I am so sorry to disturb you, but we have encountered a logistical hurdle regarding the grand ballroom setup for this Saturday." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my hand on the cool metal armrest. Tell me, what is broken, Brenda? She let out a small exhale of relief, grateful she did not have to navigate a hysterical outburst. It is the table linens, she explained. Victoria requested the imported Amalfi-spun cotton in that very specific blush tone. Our supplier just informed us that the shipping container is delayed at customs in the port. There is zero chance they will clear inspection and arrive in time for the luncheon. I closed my eyes, visualizing the design layout. The linens were the foundational texture of the room. Without them, the crystal centerpieces and the rare floral arrangements would look stark and unbalanced against bare tables. "What is your contingency plan?" I asked, keeping my voice level and unreadable. "We have a local textile merchant who carries a rare Venetian silk blend," Brenda replied quickly. "It is actually a superior fabric. It catches the light beautifully and drapes with much more elegance than the cotton. The color match is perfect. The issue is the cost. Securing it on such short notice requires a significant premium. It will be an additional $3,000. I know this is a steep increase, but it is the only way to save the aesthetic Victoria approved." The silence stretched across the cellular connection. I could hear the faint sound of the rain hitting my warehouse roof. In the background of Brenda's audio, I heard the faint clinking of silverware from the country club dining room. I opened the accounting software on my laptop. I pulled up the master ledger for the event. The original $65,000 invoice was already marked paid in full. This new charge was not a massive financial burden for my firm, but it represented something far more valuable than woven silk. In corporate event law, any substantial change to a finalized invoice requires a new signature on a digital addendum. It reasserts the financial chain of custody. By authorizing this upgrade, I was not just buying a prettier fabric, I was establishing a fresh, undeniable legal footprint on the contract, just days before the execution date. It would lock my status as the sole undisputed owner of the event assets. There could be no claims of verbal agreements or shared family funds. The paper trail would be airtight. "Send me the addendum," I instructed. "I will authorize the $3,000 charge right now. Put it on the corporate card on file." "Are you certain?" Brenda asked, the professional anxiety melting into profound gratitude. "That is incredibly generous. I will draft the authorization immediately." A soft chime from my laptop indicated the arrival of an email. I opened the document. The Alpine Country Club crest sat at the top of the page. The legal language was pristine. It named my corporate entity as the exclusive guarantor of the event space, the catering, and the design materials. I used my digital stylus to trace my signature across the bottom line, sealing the agreement. I hit send, watching the file vanish into the ether, securing my absolute power over the grand ballroom. "Thank you, Miranda," Brenda said, her voice bright and relieved. "The receipt is processing now. Should I call Victoria to inform her about the fabric change? I know she was very particular about the textures during the initial walkthrough." I stared at the gray sky beyond the rain-streaked glass. I thought about the text message my sister sent me, banning me from the room to protect her peace. I thought about my mother prioritizing a Chanel suit over my presence. I thought about the false benefactor they were worshipping. "No," I replied, my voice dropping an octave, sounding like ice cracking over a frozen lake. "The mother-to-be is not involved in the financial logistics. Keep it between us." Of course, Brenda agreed, mistaking my coldness for professional discretion. "We will ensure everything looks flawless." I ended the call and set the phone down. The logistical hiccups regarding the physical execution of the event were officially resolved. The room would be draped in rare silk. The orchids would sit in crystal vases. The menu would feature imported delicacies. The physical trap was now a masterpiece of luxury design, and I held the only key to the door. Later that evening, I sat on the plush sofa in my living room. The fireplace cast long, flickering shadows across the hardwood floor. I poured a glass of dry red wine, letting the heavy, dark liquid settle in the crystal bowl. I opened the social media application on my phone, navigating to a burner account I used for monitoring industry trends. I typed my sister's handle into the search bar. Victoria's profile picture featured her in a soft-focus maternity shoot, wearing a floral crown, projecting an image of serene maternal perfection. A glowing ring around her avatar indicated a newly uploaded story. I tapped the circle. The screen filled with a short video clip. Victoria was sitting in her pristine living room, holding a cup of herbal tea. The camera panned over to a digital rendering of the baby shower layout, zooming in on a specific color swatch. Text floated across the center of the video in an elegant cursive font. When you manifest the perfect aesthetic and secure rare Venetian silk at the last minute, impeccable taste always wins. Counting down the days until we celebrate. I watched the short video loop 3 times. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her post radiated through the screen. Victoria believed her own delusions so deeply that she thought she had willed the premium upgrade into existence through her inherent superiority. She was publicly claiming credit for a $3,000 emergency intervention that I had quietly funded just hours prior. She was boasting to her country club peers, to her wealthy mother-in-law, and to thousands of local followers, building a towering monument to her own vanity. She was digging her social grave deeper with every post, oblivious to the fact that she was standing on a trapdoor I had just finished bolting shut. I took a slow sip of the red wine. The dark fruit notes bloomed on my tongue. The tension of the impending weekend curled in my stomach, a tight, thrilling knot of anticipation. The pieces were all in position. The aesthetic was set. The audience was primed. Now there was only one final test required before I pulled the lever. 48 hours before the grand luncheon was scheduled to begin, a strange, quiet hesitation settled into my chest. It was not regret. It was not a sudden desire to surrender my leverage. It was the stubborn, lingering ghost of a daughter who still wanted to believe her family possessed a basic moral compass. When you spend 3 decades absorbing the blame for every fracture in your household, a small part of your brain demands absolute certainty before you initiate a permanent rupture. I needed to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the bridge was burned from their end before I lit the match. I decided to offer them one final test, a safety net, an opportunity to do the right thing before the floor gave way beneath their feet. I left my design warehouse early on Thursday afternoon. The sky was a pale, cloudless blue, casting a sharp light over the manicured lawns of northern New Jersey. I drove toward the Ridgewood estate with the windows rolled up, the silence inside the cabin stark and heavy. I did not call ahead. A warning would give them time to arrange their masks and rehearse their defensive lines. I wanted raw, unfiltered honesty. I parked my car in the circular driveway, the tires crunching softly against the pristine white gravel. The house loomed above me, a sprawling monument to my parents' desperation for elite status. I bypassed the grand double doors at the front entrance and walked around the side of the property, following the flagstone path toward the backyard terrace. The pool area was a masterclass in suburban leisure. The water was a shimmering expanse of chemical turquoise, the surface perfectly still. Tall hedges formed a private green fortress around the perimeter, ensuring the neighbors could not look in. The scent of expensive coconut sunscreen and chlorine hung heavy in the warm afternoon air. Victoria was reclining on a teak chaise lounge near the shallow end. She wore a designer maternity bathing suit in a soft blush tone, her eyes hidden behind oversized dark sunglasses. A tall glass of iced sparkling water rested on the side table next to her phone. A few yards away, sitting beneath a massive canvas umbrella, my father, Charles, was reading the financial section of a newspaper. He wore khaki shorts and a crisp polo shirt, the uniform of a man whose most pressing daily concern was his tea time at the local golf course. My low heels clicked against the stone patio. The sound fractured the quiet tranquility of their afternoon. Victoria tilted her head, lowering her sunglasses just enough to peer over the dark rims. Her relaxed posture vanished instantly, replaced by a rigid defensive tension. Charles lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowing with immediate irritation at the unannounced intrusion. "What are you doing here?" Victoria asked. Her tone did not carry an ounce of familial warmth. It was the sharp, annoyed cadence of a woman discovering a stranger trespassing on her private resort. I stopped a few feet away from the edge of the pool. I kept my hands resting loosely in the pockets of my tailored trousers. I did not raise my voice. I stripped all emotion from my face, presenting them with a blank, calm slate. "I came to ask you a simple question," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the gentle hum of the pool filtration system. "I want to know if you are entirely sure I am not welcome on Saturday. If you tell me right now that I should attend, I will be there. We can forget the text message you sent on Tuesday. We can move forward. I am giving you the choice." Victoria pushed her sunglasses up into her flawless blonde hair. She let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head, as if I had just suggested something deeply offensive. The sheer entitlement radiating from her posture was almost suffocating. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch. "You drove all the way over here to interrogate me about a boundary I already set? This is exactly what I was talking about, Miranda. You are so bitter and jealous that you cannot stand to see me happy for 5 minutes. You just had to come here and drag your dark cloud over my afternoon." I did not flinch. I let her insult hang in the warm air, observing the mechanics of her cruelty. She was not acting out of pregnancy hormones or momentary stress. She genuinely believed her own narrative. She believed my existence was a deliberate affront to her happiness. I looked over at Charles, waiting to see if a father would intervene to stop a daughter from tearing down her own sister. He folded his newspaper with a sharp, crisp snap, tossing it onto the glass patio table. He stood up, adjusting his belt, adopting the authoritative posture he used to intimidate junior executives at his firm. "Stop trying to make your sister's pregnancy about yourself, Miranda," he scolded, his tone dripping with condescending fatigue. "Your mother and I are exhausted by your constant need for drama." Victoria made a decision for her own peace of mind, and Carter's family agrees. You do not fit the aesthetic of this gathering. Why do you insist on forcing yourself into spaces where you make people uncomfortable? Go back to your office. Do some work. Leave us alone. The silence that followed his command was absolute. The quiet hum of the pool filter seemed to magnify in the stillness. My final moral hesitation vanished, evaporating like a drop of water on hot pavement. The lingering guilt, the quiet voice in my head, wondering if I was taking things too far, was silenced forever. They had dug their trench. They had chosen their side. They looked at me and saw nothing but a nuisance, a bitter shadow threatening to ruin their perfect pastel illusion. They felt no remorse for casting me out. They only felt annoyed that I dared to ask for clarification. A soft, rustling sound broke the tension. From the shadow of the hedges, a golden retriever trotted onto the patio. It was the family dog, an aging, gentle creature named Jasper. His tail wagged in a slow, rhythmic greeting as he spotted me. He walked directly to my side, ignoring Victoria and Charles, and pressed his wet nose against my hand. I looked down at the dog. He was the only living creature on this sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate that genuinely seemed happy to see me. I pulled my hand from my pocket and rested it on his head, running my fingers through his soft, sun-warmed fur. I gave him a slow, affectionate scratch behind the ears. It was a brief grounding moment of genuine connection in a space built entirely on lies. "Good boy, Jasper," I murmured softly. I did not look back at my father. I did not look at my sister. There was no point in arguing with people who were determined to misunderstand me. I turned around and walked back down the flagstone path, leaving them to their shimmering pool and their borrowed luxury. My footsteps felt lighter as I reached my car. The heavy burden of trying to be the supportive daughter was gone, replaced by the thrilling, razor-sharp focus of a corporate executive holding a royal flush. I started the engine, the low rumble vibrating through the steering wheel. I did not drive back to my warehouse. I did not drive to my townhouse to cry. I pulled out of the Ridgewood Estate gates and merged onto the main road, pointing the hood of my car directly toward the affluent heart of the county. The Alpine Country Club was a 15-minute drive from my parents' property. The management office would remain open for another 2 hours. I had given my family every opportunity to step back from the ledge. They had proudly chosen to jump. Now it was time to make sure they hit the ground. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, initiating the protocol for a perfectly legal, devastating contractual pivot. The drive to the Alpine Country Club took exactly 14 minutes. I navigated the winding tree-lined roads of the affluent township with the mechanical precision of a woman who had memorized every turn. The estates passing outside my window grew larger and more imposing, hidden behind iron gates and dense rows of imported evergreens. This was a landscape engineered to keep the uninvited out. It was a geography built on exclusion, where access was the ultimate currency. I approached the grand entrance of the club. The architecture was an intimidating display of colonial limestone slate roofs and sweeping verandas. The circular driveway was paved with hand-laid cobblestones. I pulled my vehicle to a stop under the expansive portico. A valet in a crisp uniform immediately opened my door, offering a polite, deferential greeting. I handed him the keys, my expression blank, my mind operating several miles ahead of my physical location. As a senior luxury event designer, I spend a significant portion of my life walking through the back corridors of these exclusive institutions. I know the anatomy of a country club. They project an aura of effortless leisure to their members, but behind the scenes, they run on ironclad contracts, rigid schedules, and strict financial liability. I bypassed the main lobby, ignoring the vaulted ceilings and the crystal chandeliers, and walked directly toward the executive management wing. The corridor was paneled in dark mahogany, smelling faintly of lemon wax and old money. I stopped outside a heavy oak door bearing a brass nameplate, Thomas Vance, General Manager. I knocked twice, a sharp rhythmic rap, and opened the door without waiting for an invitation. Thomas looked up from his dual monitors. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably groomed, wearing a tailored navy suit. His survival in this high society ecosystem depended entirely on keeping wealthy people comfortable and sheltered from inconvenience. He recognized me instantly. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, smoothing a polished smile onto his face. "Good afternoon," Miranda Thomas said, gesturing toward the leather guest chairs facing his desk. "We were just finalizing the staff roster for the grand ballroom this weekend. The new silk linens arrived an hour ago. Everything is proceeding flawlessly." I took a seat in the heavy leather chair. I did not return his smile. I placed my leather briefcase on my lap, undoing the metal clasps with a firm click. I pulled out the master event file, a thick stack of pristine white paper bearing the Alpine Country Club letterhead. I set the document flat on the center of his polished desk. "We are executing a corporate reallocation. Thomas," I said, my voice steady, carrying the clipped professional cadence I used for difficult vendor negotiations. "I need you to pull up the master contract for the ballroom." Thomas furrowed his brow, sinking back into his executive chair. He reached for his mouse, clicking through his digital calendar. "A reallocation," he repeated, the polished veneer cracking slightly to reveal genuine confusion. "The event is less than 48 hours away. If there is an issue with the guest count, we can accommodate minor adjustments, but a full reallocation is highly irregular." I tapped my index finger against the edge of the printed contract. "Look at Section 4, Paragraph 2, I instructed. He leaned closer to his monitor, his eyes scanning the digital text. I knew exactly what he was reading. When I booked this venue 6 months ago, I did not sign the paperwork as Victoria's sister. I did not use a personal family account. I utilized my event design firm to secure the space. In the luxury hospitality industry, my company frequently books premium venues years in advance, holding the dates under our corporate entity before transferring them to our final clients. It is a standard protective measure designed to shield vendors from unreliable individuals. The contract contained a flexible transfer clause, granting my firm the unilateral right to reassign the event assets to any party of our choosing up to 24 hours before the execution date. "I am not canceling the event," I explained, watching his eyes dart across the screen. If I simply canceled the luncheon club, protocol would dictate a specific chain of events. Thomas would be obligated to notify the scheduled guest of honor or her immediate family that the reservation was voided. My father, desperate to protect his social standing, would rush down to this office with his premium credit card. He would pay the late booking penalties, cover the catering costs, and buy the room back. Victoria would still get her lavish photo opportunity, and my parents would spin a narrative painting me as a vindictive, unstable woman who tried to sabotage a pregnancy. They would survive the fallout. I needed a mechanism that consumed the room entirely, leaving zero space for a financial rescue. "I am invoking the corporate transfer rights," I continued, my tone lowering, cementing the gravity of the instruction. "You will transfer the grand ballroom reservation, the imported floral arrangements, the custom catering menu, and the premium open bar to a new client." Thomas stared at me, the color draining slightly from his face. "To whom?" he asked, his voice losing its practiced professional warmth. "The Horizon Women in Enterprise Foundation," I replied. "It is a local charity organization I have mentored for the past 3 years. The foundation supports female entrepreneurs striving to build independent businesses without the safety net of a trust fund or a wealthy spouse. They are women who run small bakeries out of their kitchens, manage freelance graphic design portfolios, and operate independent accounting firms. They are the exact demographic my sister mocked as corporate workhorses. They possess the ambition and the grind mindset my family finds so distasteful. I decided they deserved a luxury gala. They deserved to sit beneath rare Venetian silk, eat wild-caught sea bass, and enjoy an afternoon of uncompromising elegance. Thomas read the printed addendum I slid across his desk. The realization hit him in slow, visible waves. He knew Carter's family. He knew Sylvia sat on the club membership committee. He understood the intricate, fragile social web of Alpine, New Jersey. And he realized I was handing him the scissors to cut the main thread. "Miranda," he started, clearing his throat nervously. "If I process this transfer, the room will be legally occupied by your charity. When Victoria and her guests arrive on Saturday, there will be no space for them. We have no other rooms available. They will be turned away at the lobby." "That is correct," I said, keeping my gaze locked on his. "The ensuing scene will be catastrophic," Thomas warned, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "Sylvia will demand answers. Your parents will demand answers. It will be a highly public incident in our main foyer. The financial guarantor of this event is my corporate entity," I reminded him, my voice devoid of sympathy or hesitation. "The invoice is paid in full. You have no legal standing to deny a contractual transfer. The internal family dynamics are not the concern of the Alpine Country Club management. You will execute the paperwork, Thomas." He looked at the document, then back at me. He was a man trapped between his fear of high society gossip and his binding obligation to corporate law. The law won. He exhaled a long defeated breath and reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a heavy brass stamper to notarize the internal shift. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and withdrew my favorite silver fountain pen. The cool, heavy metal grounded my fingers. I unscrewed the cap, placing it carefully on the desk. I smoothed the thick paper of the transfer addendum flat. I signed my name on the bottom line. The nib of the pen scratched softly against the paper, leaving a trail of dark, permanent ink. Thomas watched my hand move across the page. His eyes widened slightly as the ink settled into the fibers of the document. He was witnessing a quiet forensic execution. He recognized the sheer magnitude of the drama about to unfold on his pristine marble floors, understanding that he was entirely powerless to stop it. I recapped the silver pen and slipped it back into my pocket. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer, projecting the calm, impenetrable aura of a successful executive. "The Horizon Foundation board members will arrive at 11 on Saturday morning," I informed him, heading toward the door. "Please ensure the valet staff is prepared to treat them with the exact same deference they would offer any legacy member of this club. I will see to it personally," Thomas replied, his voice subdued, his eyes still fixed on the signed addendum. I walked out of the executive suite and back down the mahogany corridor. The threat of my family salvaging the event by throwing their own money at the problem at the last minute was permanently neutralized. The room belonged to the charity. The food belonged to the charity. The aesthetic my sister so desperately craved was legally locked away behind a corporate wall she could never breach. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, handing my valet ticket to the attendant. A profound, echoing silence seemed to settle over the sprawling country club grounds. The countdown had officially begun. The luncheon was exactly 48 hours away. 100 high society guests wearing pastel designer dresses and carrying expensive gifts were currently preparing their weekend schedules. They were anticipating an afternoon of flawless performative luxury, ready to worship at the altar of my sister's flawless image. They had no idea they were driving toward a venue that no longer belonged to the guest of honor. The trap was armed. The timer was ticking, and I was going to enjoy watching the clock run out. Saturday afternoon descended upon Alpine, New Jersey, bringing the kind of flawless golden sunlight that money usually cannot buy. But in this zip code, even the weather seemed to bend to the will of the local aristocracy. The pristine climate cast a brilliant glow over the sweeping slate roof and towering limestone pillars of the Alpine Country Club. The air inside the grand lobby smelled of fresh eucalyptus and expensive citrus perfume. The polished marble floors gleamed beneath the weight of tiered crystal chandeliers, reflecting the midday light into blinding fractals. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the exact hour the trap was scheduled to spring. I did not stay home. As the principal mentor and sponsor of the Horizon Women in Enterprise Gala, my attendance was mandatory. I wore a tailored emerald green suit, my hair pulled back into a sleek, severe twist. I stood near the interior doors of the grand ballroom, separated from the main foyer by a thick pane of soundproof glass and a heavy velvet rope. From this vantage point, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the entrance. I was safely on the inside, waiting for the collision to occur on the outside. The guests arrived in steady, glittering waves. 100 members of the suburban elite poured through the rotating brass doors, surrendering their luxury vehicles to the valet attendants. They wore pastel chiffon dresses, tailored linen slacks, and wide-brimmed designer fascinators. They carried expensive gifts wrapped in thick silver paper and tied with custom silk ribbons. The lobby quickly filled with the melodic, practiced chatter of high society. Women clustered in small groups, checking their reflections in the gilded mirrors, eager to participate in the lavish spectacle they believed awaited them. Sylvia arrived flanked by her prestigious tennis circle. She wore a stunning lavender suit, her posture radiating an air of quiet supremacy. She accepted preemptive compliments on her supposed generosity with practiced, modest smiles. She floated through the crowd like a monarch inspecting her subjects, entirely unaware that the crown she wore was forged from a lie. Then a hush rippled through the immediate vicinity of the entrance. A sleek, black, chauffeured town car pulled up to the cobblestone portico. The driver jobbed around the vehicle to open the rear door. Victoria stepped out. She wore a custom blush maternity gown that swept the ground, the fabric catching the breeze with cinematic grace. Her blonde hair fell in flawless, cascading waves around her shoulders. She rested one hand delicately beneath her bump, projecting the radiant, serene image she had curated for months. This was her moment of triumph, her ascension to the peak of her social climbing. Evelyn and Charles flanked her, acting as her royal guard. Evelyn wore her ivory boucle vintage Chanel suit, her chin held high, scanning the room to ensure every eye was fixed on her prized daughter. Charles walked with his chest puffed out, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive blazer, ready to play the role of the proud patriarch. They basked in the collective attention, their vanity fully inflated by the admiration of their peers. Carter trailed slightly behind them, looking relaxed and eager for an afternoon of open-bar privileges. The crowd parted naturally, creating a clear path for the guest of honor to glide toward the entrance of the grand ballroom. Victoria smiled at the guests lining her route, offering breathy words of gratitude and blowing delicate kisses. She was ascending the final steps of her curated fantasy. The anticipation of the day had finally culminated in this grand arrival. The aesthetic was set, the audience was present, and the trap was officially sprung. They reached the velvet rope guarding the ballroom entrance. Above the heavy oak doors built into the carved limestone archway hung a large digital welcome screen. Usually this display featured elegant cursive, welcoming the specific party, framing the perfect photo opportunity for the arriving guests. Victoria paused, tilting her chin up, expecting to see a glowing tribute to her unborn child. Instead, the high-definition screen displayed a stark, modern logo in bold, silver lettering. It read, Horizon Foundation, Annual Women in Enterprise Gala. Victoria stopped walking. Her serene smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in her pristine porcelain mask. She blinked, staring up at the screen, her mind struggling to process the visual dissonance. She quickly recovered her composure, assuming it was a simple technological error made by incompetent staff. She reached up and touched her perfect hair, letting out a soft, condescending little laugh. She turned her attention to the senior maitre d', a veteran hospitality director named David, who stood at the podium beside the velvet rope. "Oh, honey," Victoria cooed, her voice carrying the sharp edge of elite entitlement. "You have the wrong signage up for my event. My mother-in-law secured this room. Please fix the screen before the photographer arrives." David did not flinch. He was a seasoned professional who had navigated demanding clients and high-stakes temper tantrums for 2 decades. He wore a crisp tuxedo, his posture rigid and formal. He looked down at his leather-bound ledger, running a white-gloved finger down the printed guest list. Then he looked back up at Victoria, his expression polite but unyielding. "I apologize for any confusion," Madam David said. His voice was clear and resonant, carrying effortlessly over the sudden quiet of the immediate crowd. "But the digital display is correct. We are currently seating the Horizon Foundation Gala in the grand ballroom." Victoria scoffed, waving a manicured hand dismissively toward the heavy oak doors. "No, you are confused. I am Victoria. This is my baby shower. Sylvia booked this. Just correct the digital monitor and unclip the rope. My guests are waiting to be seated." David turned a page in his ledger. He did not reach for the brass clasp of the velvet rope. "Madam, I have personally reviewed the master schedule for the entire property today," David replied, his tone remaining infuriatingly calm. "There is no baby shower booked under your name." Evelyn stepped forward, her Chanel suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a costume. "What on earth are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch, drawing the attention of more guests in the lobby. "Carter, step up here and tell this man who your mother is. This is a ridiculous mistake." David maintained his steady posture, folding his hands over the ledger.
"I am very familiar with Sylvia, madam. However, there is no reservation under her name either. There are no private family luncheons scheduled at the Alpine Country Club today. The Grand Ballroom is legally contracted to the charity organization currently dining inside." The new conflict detonated in the center of the foyer. The maitre d' had just informed the reigning princess of Alpine that she possessed no power, no reservation, and no room. The fallout was instantaneous. The polished anticipation that had filled the lobby seconds ago shattered into a million jagged pieces. The 100 guests, dressed in their pastel finery, stopped mingling.
The hushed whispers mutated into a low, frantic buzz of highly visible confusion. Women in designer dresses exchanged bewildered glances, clutching their wrapped gifts tightly against their chests. Men in linen suits checked their watches and their printed invitations, trying to calculate the social math of a cancelled luxury event. Victoria stood frozen at the center of the growing chaos. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath her expensive contour makeup. She stared at the velvet rope, the terrifying realization washing over her that it was not going to open. The flawless, unbothered aesthetic she had weaponized against me was collapsing in real time, exposed to the very people she sought to impress. From my position behind the glass, I watched my family plunge into the suffocating reality of a public scandal. They had built their entire identity on the perception of total control. They believed they could banish the inconvenient parts of their lives and keep only the beautiful reflections. Now, standing stranded in a marble lobby, surrounded by confused socialites, they had just lost that control in front of the local aristocracy. I stood behind the soundproof glass of the ballroom doors. The heavy velvet rope separated my sanctuary from their escalating nightmare. The ambient noise of the charity gala behind me faded into a dull hum. I was fixated on the silent theater unfolding beyond the barricade. The marble foyer of the Alpine Country Club transformed from a welcoming reception area into a claustrophobic holding cell. 100 elite guests shifted uneasily in their designer shoes. The melodic chatter evaporated. It was replaced by a toxic, spreading silence. You could practically smell the sudden spike of adrenaline mixing with expensive floral perfumes. Victoria stared at the maitre d'. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. The soft maternal aura she had curated for months fractured under the crushing weight of public denial. She had never been told no in a space like this. In her insulated reality, closed doors were meant for other people. Obstacles were mere inconveniences her parents bought their way out of. Evelyn clutched her vintage Chanel purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Charles stepped forward. He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate the hospitality staff. He pointed a thick finger at the podium. "Do you have any idea who we are?" Charles demanded. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "We are spending a fortune here today. My daughter is hosting a private luncheon. I demand you unclip that rope immediately." David did not flinch. "I am following the legal directives of the venue management, sir," he replied smoothly. Victoria snatched her designer clutch. "Get me Thomas Vance," she ordered. Her tone lost every ounce of its manufactured sweetness. It descended into a harsh, guttural entitlement. "Get the general manager out here right this second." Thomas walked out from the mahogany executive corridor. He carried a simple leather folder. He approached the velvet rope, nodding politely to the assembled crowd before turning his attention to my furious family. Victoria did not give him a chance to speak. She launched into a blistering tirade. "Thomas, we have a catastrophic staffing error happening right now," Victoria announced loudly. She ensured the entire lobby could hear her commanding tone. "This employee is refusing to seat my guests. My mother-in-law Sylvia secured this room. She is standing right here. You need to fix this monitor and open those doors before I ruin this club reputation." Sylvia stood a few feet away, surrounded by her tennis circle. She offered a tight, uneasy smile. The matriarch was suddenly caught in the spotlight. She was forced to maintain the illusion of her unmatched generosity. She gave Thomas a subtle, expectant nod. She anticipated the general manager would simply apologize and correct the mistake. Thomas opened his folder. "I am very sorry for the distress this is causing," Victoria Thomas said. His voice was measured and professional. "But there is no error. The Grand Ballroom is legally contracted to the Horizon Foundation. The event currently taking place inside is fully funded and legally binding. We cannot grant you access." Panic set in. It was a visceral, visible, frantic energy that swept through my mother and sister. Victoria darted her eyes around the lobby. The whispering among the high society guests grew louder. The socialites were calculating the disaster, exchanging knowing glances. In a community where status is everything, public rejection is the ultimate humiliation. Charles lowered his hand. The bluster drained out of him. He looked at Thomas, then at the closed oak doors. The patriarch who had spent his life managing optics suddenly realized he was standing in the middle of a monumental public relations nightmare. He reached for his wallet, an instinctual response to crisis, but his fingers hovered over the leather. He knew deep down that no credit limit could buy back their dignity in this exact moment. Victoria made a fatal miscalculation. Driven by sheer arrogance and a desperate need to prove her supremacy, she decided to weaponize her external event planner. She reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone. She intended to put the venue management in their place in front of her audience. "I am calling Rachel Victoria," declared. She was referring to the independent coordinator she had hired to manage her invitations and seating charts. "She is going to clear this up right now." Victoria swiped her screen, hit the call button, and pressed the speakerphone icon. She held the device up high, turning the volume to maximum. The dialing tone echoed through the silent marble lobby. 1 ring. 2 rings. The tension in the air was so thick it felt tangible. Every guest in the foyer held their breath, leaning in to witness the spectacle. I watched from behind the glass, feeling the cold, thrilling certainty of the impending drop. Rachel answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello," Victoria the planner said, her voice projected clearly from the tiny speaker. Her tone sounded strained, lacking the usual cheerful cadence reserved for high-net-worth clients. "Rachel, tell this general manager what is going on," Victoria demanded. She stood tall, projecting total confidence. "Tell him about the reservation my mother-in-law paid for. Tell him to open the grand ballroom doors for my baby shower." A long, agonizing pause emanated from the phone. The silence stretched, amplifying the mounting dread creeping into Evelyn's eyes. When Rachel finally spoke, her words shattered the curated illusion into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "Victoria," Rachel began. Her voice echoed off the limestone pillars. "Your mother-in-law did not pay for this." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sylvia stiffened, her eyes widening in pure shock. Victoria lowered the phone slightly, her mouth falling open. "Miranda Jane paid $65,000 for this event 6 months ago," Rachel continued. She delivered the fatal blow with clinical precision. She funded the venue, the catering, and the custom decor out of her own corporate accounts. When you explicitly banned her from attending earlier this week, she invoked her legal transfer rights. She transferred the assets to her charity. The room belongs to the Horizon Foundation. You do not have a reservation anymore. The phone call ended with a sharp electronic click. The dial tone hummed into the devastating silence. The secret benefactor was spectacularly revealed. The false narrative Victoria had spun was entirely destroyed. The truth laid bare the staggering depth of her entitlement. I watched Carter's mother react. Sylvia physically stepped away from Evelyn. It was a slow, deliberate movement, creating a visible chasm between the two families. Sylvia's face turned crimson. A deep, burning red flushed across her neck and cheeks. She was caught in a magnificent lie in front of her most judgmental peers. She had basked in the glory of a fortune she did not spend. Now, the entire tennis circle knew she was a fraud. Evelyn reached a hand out toward Sylvia. It was a desperate attempt to bridge the sudden gap. Sylvia recoiled, turning her shoulder, refusing to make eye contact. The unspoken alliance collapsed into dust right on the foyer floor. The carefully built social bridge between their households was gone. Victoria stared at her phone. Her hands trembled. The crushing reality of the situation washed over her. She was not the glowing center of the universe. She was a woman standing in a borrowed dress, locked out of a room she never owned. She was exposed as a cruel sibling who had bitten the hand that fed her. The old conflict regarding the hidden financial benefactor was permanently resolved. The mystery was dead. But a new, far more terrifying conflict birthed itself in the center of that lobby. The family flawless public image dissolved instantly. They were no longer the unbothered elite. They were a cautionary tale. They had to turn around, face the 100 guests carrying expensive gifts, and endure the brutal, unforgiving judgment of their superficial peers. The silence that followed the speakerphone revelation did not last long. It fractured under the weight of its own awkwardness, shattering into a chaotic symphony of frantic whispers and shifting designer heels. The marble foyer of the Alpine Country Club transformed into an arena of sheer panic. From my vantage point behind the soundproof glass of the ballroom doors, the scene played out like a tragic silent film, though the sheer panic vibrating through the lobby was palpable even without sound. Charles broke first. For his entire adult life, my father operated under a singular guiding philosophy. He believed that any mistake, any fracture in the family facade could be paved over with enough capital. He viewed social friction as a mere transaction, waiting for a signature. When he realized his pristine reputation was disintegrating in front of his elite golf buddies and his wealthy in-laws, his instinct was to reach for his wallet. He lunged toward the maitre d' podium, his face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. He pushed past his frozen wife, elbowing his way to the front of the velvet rope. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored blazer and produced a heavy black titanium American Express card. The metal caught the light of the crystal chandeliers as he slammed it down onto the polished wood of the stand. "I do not care what that event planner just said on the phone," Charles barked, his voice echoing with desperate, ragged authority. "Name your price, Thomas, whatever penalty fee you require, whatever exorbitant upcharge you want to invent. Put it on this card. We are buying the room back right now. This is my daughter. These are our guests. We are not leaving this lobby." Thomas looked down at the premium credit card resting on his podium. The general manager did not reach for it. He did not flinch under the bluster of an angry patriarch. He offered a slow, measured shake of his head, delivering the final, fatal blow to my father's illusion of control. "I am sorry," Charles Thomas replied, his tone radiating an unyielding professional calm. "But there is no price you can pay. The room is no longer for sale." "I will double the original invoice," Charles pressed, leaning his weight against the podium, sweat beginning to bead along his hairline. "Just open the doors." "Sir, you do not understand the logistics of this situation," Thomas explained, gesturing toward the heavy oak doors separating the foyer from the grand ballroom. "The Horizon Foundation is already seated inside. The luncheon has commenced. The charity members are currently dining on the imported menu. They are enjoying the string quartet. There is zero physical space left in the venue, and we do not have a secondary ballroom to offer you. The assets have been consumed." The reality of the venue manager's words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Thomas was confirming the exact details I had orchestrated. Beyond those doors, local female entrepreneurs were resting their hands on rare Venetian silk. They were admiring the white Phalaenopsis orchids I had meticulously selected. The luxury my sister craved was currently being enjoyed by women who actually earned their seats at the table. Charles stared at the titanium card on the podium. The heavy metal rectangle, the ultimate symbol of his financial superiority, was suddenly worthless. All his life he had used his bank accounts to shield himself from accountability. He paid to keep the lawn pristine, he paid to keep the country club memberships active, and he allowed Victoria to pretend his money came with a shield of invincibility. Now, standing under the bright lights of the foyer, the illusion was obliterated. Wealth could not buy them out of this specific embarrassment. He slowly pulled his hand back, sliding the useless card back into his jacket pocket, his shoulders slumping in profound defeat. A sharp, heavy thud drew the attention of the crowd. Victoria stood a few feet away, her arms hanging limp at her sides. Her $5,000 Birkin bag had slipped from her grip, hitting the marble floor with a dull, heavy slap of calfskin leather and brass hardware. She did not bend down to retrieve it. Tears began to spill over her eyelashes, cutting dark tracks through her expensive contour makeup. Her breath hitched in her throat, escaping in jagged, wet sobs. But watching her, standing there, weeping in her custom blush maternity gown, I felt no sympathy. I knew exactly what she was mourning, and it was not the loss of her sister. She was not crying because she realized the depth of her cruelty, nor was she weeping over the familial rift she had caused. Victoria was crying because her flawless Instagram aesthetic was dead. She had spent 6 months curating the perfect vision of her ascension into high society. She had planned the camera angles, selected the filter presets, and bragged to her followers about her impeccable taste. She had envisioned standing in front of those floral arches, accepting lavish gifts, and proving to the world that she was the golden child who had secured the ultimate prize. Now there would be no photographs. There would be no social media triumph. Her digital fantasy had collided with a concrete wall of consequences, and the impact broke her. The socialites in the lobby watched the golden girl crumble. The initial shock radiating through the guests rapidly morphed into something far more dangerous. It transformed into a cold clinical judgment. In Alpine, vulnerability is a weakness, and public humiliation is a contagious disease. No one wants to stand too close to a sinking ship, lest the water stain their own designer shoes. Sylvia initiated the exodus. Carter's mother did not offer a word of comfort to her weeping daughter-in-law. She did not glance at Evelyn, who was currently staring blankly at the velvet rope. Sylvia simply turned on the heel of her lavender pump, signaled her tennis circle with a subtle tilt of her head, and began walking toward the exit. She signaled the valet stand through the glass doors, leading her prestigious clique away from the wreckage. The departure of the matriarch served as a silent command to the rest of the room. The remaining guests began to shuffle awkwardly toward the rotating brass doors. It was a slow, agonizing retreat. Women in pastel dresses averted their eyes, whispering furiously behind manicured hands and silver-wrapped boxes. The melodic chatter from 20 minutes ago was replaced by the rustle of escaping silk and the click of hurried footsteps. "We should probably get going," a woman in a floral fascinator murmured to her husband, steering him toward the exit. "This is just too uncomfortable. Let us just leave the gift at their house next week," another guest whispered, pulling her associate toward the valet queue. "I cannot believe Sylvia lied about paying for this. What a disaster." I watched the crowd recede like a rapid, retreating tide. They were not just leaving a canceled luncheon, they were taking the story with them. These 100 guests represented the most interconnected gossip network in northern New Jersey. By the time they reached their luxury vehicles, text messages would be flying across the county. The narrative of the banished sister, the false benefactor, and the ruined baby shower would be dissected in every upscale salon, private dining room, and tennis court before the sun went down. Evelyn reached down with trembling hands and picked up the discarded Birkin bag. She held the expensive leather against her chest like a shield, her eyes wide and glassy as she watched her peers walk out the door. Charles stood frozen next to her, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the empty space where his elite friends had stood moments prior. Carter stood a few paces away, rubbing the back of his neck, looking at his wife and his in-laws with a new, deeply critical expression. The old conflict was officially dead. The parents had lost their ability to control the narrative, but the foyer was no longer just an empty room. It was the birthplace of a terrifying new reality. My family was now socially stranded. They had built their entire identity on the approval of the people who were currently driving away, carrying the shards of their ruined reputation out into the world. The gates they had used to lock me out were now the exact same gates trapping them in a prison of their own making. As the final guest pushed through the brass doors, leaving my mother, father, and sister standing alone in the vast, echoing lobby, the true consequences of their betrayal began to take root. I departed the country club grounds through a side exit, slipping away before the valet stand became a bottleneck of fleeing socialites. The drive back to my townhouse felt remarkably short. The knot of anxiety that typically sat beneath my ribs after interacting with my relatives was gone. I walked through my front door and locked the deadbolt. My home is a sanctuary of clean lines, dark soapstone counters, and quiet order. It stands in stark opposition to the chaotic, performative fluff my sister demanded for her existence. I walked into the kitchen and began the ritual of making coffee. The mechanical grind of the roasted beans provided a grounding, rhythmic noise. I poured steaming water over the dark grounds, watching the rich liquid bloom and drip into my favorite ceramic mug. The aroma filled the space, earthy and bitter. I leaned against the counter, wrapping both hands around the warm clay. I took a slow sip. The silence of my kitchen was profound, yet it hummed with the invisible reverberations of the seismic event I had just triggered. At exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, the digital screen of my cellular phone lit up on the kitchen island. The device vibrated against the marble surface, a persistent, angry buzzing. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I did not rush to answer. I took another measured sip of my beverage, letting the hot liquid coat my throat. On the fifth ring, I swiped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. Evelyn bypassed any pretense of civilization. A shrieking, breathless wail erupted from the tiny speaker. The volume was pushed so high, the audio distorted, cracking her syllables into sharp, piercing static. "You vindictive sociopath," Evelyn screamed. Her voice tore through the quiet tranquility of my home. "You ruined your sister. You humiliated us in front of the entire county. Sylvia is refusing to take my calls. Half the guests left their gifts with the valet and drove away without speaking to us. Victoria is locked in her bedroom having a panic attack. How could you do this to your own blood?" I held the phone a few inches away from my ear. I did not interrupt her frantic monologue. Her fury was a fascinating study in narcissistic injury. She offered no apologies for stealing my money or accepting credit for my labor. She expressed no remorse for banishing me from a family milestone. Her rage was entirely rooted in the fact that I had stripped away her public mask, exposing the ugly, rotting foundation of her favorite child. She was furious because I refused to stay in my designated place as the invisible, silent wallet. She continued to shriek, hurling insults about my character, my career, and my supposed jealousy. I listened to the frantic pacing of her footsteps on their hardwood floors. When she finally paused to draw a ragged, shuddering breath, the silence stretched over the cellular connection. I lifted the heavy ceramic mug to my lips and took a quiet sip. The faint clink of the pottery echoed into the receiver. "I just did not want to bring any negative energy to her special day," I replied. My voice was smooth, detached, and perfectly level. I kept my distance exactly as requested. "Harmonious aesthetic alignment, Mom." A stunned, suffocated gasp transmitted through the speaker. Using Victoria's own toxic therapy speak against them was a forensic strike. It highlighted the undeniable truth of their hypocrisy. They had handed me the exact weapon I used to dismantle their afternoon, and they could not argue against their own printed words. The immediate confrontation between the scapegoat and the enabler reached its peak, but I refused to provide the hysterical screaming match she desperately craved to validate her victimhood. Before Evelyn could formulate a response, the background audio of the phone call shifted. The united front my parents projected for decades began to fracture in real time. Charles bellowed from somewhere down the hallway of the Ridgewood estate. His voice was thick with unadulterated rage, carrying a raw, unpolished fury I had never heard him direct at his wife. "Why did you not just invite her in the first place?" Charles roared. The sound of a heavy door slamming shook the audio feed. "You told me she was too busy with her corporate clients to attend. You told me Sylvia paid the vendor invoices. You lied to my face, Evelyn. You and Victoria sat at that brunch and let me make a fool of myself, toasting a woman who did not spend a dime. You let me pull out my credit card in front of the entire club management like an idiot. I looked like a desperate clown holding a worthless piece of plastic while Thomas Vance pitied me. My golf partners were standing right there. The immediate internal cannibalization was spectacular to witness. The family was turning on each other. Charles was a man obsessed with his golf club reputation and his financial superiority. Realizing his wife and youngest daughter had orchestrated a lie that publicly stripped him of his dignity was an unforgivable offense. He did not care about my feelings. He cared that he looked weak and foolish in front of his peers. The blame game was tearing their marriage apart, pulling the curtain back on a household that ran exclusively on deceit and borrowed prestige. Evelyn lowered the phone, her voice dropping into a frantic, pleading hiss as she tried to placate her furious husband. "Charles, lower your voice," she begged. "The neighbors will hear you. We can fix this. We just need to hire a crisis manager." "You cannot spin this," Evelyn, Charles shouted back, his footsteps growing louder as he approached her position. "The whole town already knows." The club president was in the lobby. Then a third voice cut through the chaos. It was Carter. My brother-in-law usually possessed the easy, untroubled demeanor of a man who floated through life on a cushion of generational wealth. He rarely raised his voice. He avoided conflict, preferring to stand in the background with a cocktail while Victoria managed their social calendar. But the tone echoing through the phone now was laced with a chilling, disgusted clarity. Carter had stood in that marble foyer and watched his own mother humiliated. He had witnessed his wife caught in a monumental, undeniable fraud. "Is this who you really are?" Carter asked. His voice was directed at someone off camera, presumably Victoria, who must have emerged from her bedroom. "You lied to my mother. You let her take the credit for a charity gala she had nothing to do with, letting her bask in a lie that just exploded in her face. You treated your own sister like disposable garbage, just so you could take pictures in a room you did not even pay for. You used my family reputation to bankroll a fantasy, and when you got caught, you let my mother take the fall." Victoria offered a muffled, sobbing protest, attempting to deploy her usual weapon of victimhood. "Carter, please," she wailed. "I was just trying to make it perfect for the baby. Miranda is just jealous." "Do not use our child to justify your vanity," Carter snapped. The sheer revulsion in his tone was devastating. "My mother is resigning from the membership committee because she is too embarrassed to show her face. You manipulated my family to stroke your own ego. I am leaving, Victoria. I need to go stay at my parents' house. I cannot even look at you right now." The sound of heavy footsteps marched toward the front entrance of the estate. Victoria unleashed a guttural, desperate scream, begging her husband not to walk out the door. The heavy mahogany entryway slammed shut with a finality that rattled the phone speaker. I stood in my quiet kitchen, holding the device to my ear, listening to the sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate collapse into a war zone. Carter, humiliated in front of his prestigious lineage, was now seriously questioning the fundamental character of the woman he married. The toxic nature of the family he had married into was laid bare, threatening the very foundation of their union. The pristine pastel fantasy was dead, replaced by the ugly, chaotic reality of their own actions. I lowered the phone from my ear and tapped the red icon, severing the connection. I set the device face down on the cool soapstone counter. I picked up my coffee mug and took another slow, deliberate sip. The dark roast tasted exceptional. By Sunday morning, the gossip saturated our wealthy enclave with the speed and efficiency of a localized hurricane. In towns like Alpine, information is a highly traded commodity. The story of the canceled luncheon, the screening match in the lobby, and Carter storming out of the Ridgewood estate moved through text chains and private group chats faster than any local news cycle. I sat on my patio drinking iced tea, watching the digital fallout unfold on my tablet. I did not post a single word. I did not need to. Silence is often the most devastating weapon when your opponent is addicted to speaking. Victoria spent the night alone in her sprawling house. Her husband was gone. Her parents were trapped in a bitter standoff. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, she fell back on the only strategy she knew. She attempted to manipulate the optics. At 10 o'clock, she uploaded a tearful video to her social media profile. I tapped the screen to watch the broadcast. Victoria sat on her pristine velvet sofa. She wore a simple white cashmere sweater, a deliberate departure from her usual glamorous attire, designed to project innocence and vulnerability. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy knot. She had carefully applied makeup to look as though she had been crying for hours, yet her skin remained flawlessly matte. "I wanted to address the heartbreak my family experienced yesterday," she began. Her voice quivered with practiced cinematic grief. "We arrived at the Alpine Country Club for my shower and discovered a cruel administrative mix-up. The venue double-booked the grand ballroom. My mother-in-law Sylvia spent months planning a beautiful afternoon for this baby, and a corporate event stole our reservation. I am devastated. We are exploring our legal options against the management." I watched the video loop a second time. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her spin was a marvel of narcissistic engineering. She refused to take an ounce of accountability. She doubled down on the lie that Sylvia funded the event, hoping to guilt her mother-in-law back into the fold. She blamed Thomas and the venue staff, calculating that a large corporate entity made an easy, faceless villain. For the first 10 minutes, the strategy appeared to work. Her followers flooded the comment section with sympathetic heart icons and outrage directed at the country club. Friends from her yoga studio and casual acquaintances offered empty platitudes about suing the venue. Victoria sat behind her screen, curating the replies, deleting anything that questioned her timeline. But the internet is a vast, unforgiving space, and a public profile is a two-way mirror. Victoria forgot a crucial variable in her desperate public relations equation. She forgot who was actually sitting inside the grand ballroom on Saturday afternoon. The Horizon Women in Enterprise Gala was attended by 100 independent female business owners. These were fierce, self-made women who ran catering empires, boutique public relations firms, and high-end floral design studios. They were heavily active on social media, utilizing digital platforms to market their own brands. They recognized the venue. They recognized the rare Venetian silk linens, and most importantly, they recognized the white Phalaenopsis orchids. The tide in the comment section turned with brutal swiftness. A woman named Sarah, who owns a prominent local bakery, posted the first strike. "I was at the charity gala inside that ballroom yesterday," Sarah wrote. "It was not a mix-up, Victoria. Miranda Jane paid for the entire room and transferred the contract to our foundation because you uninvited her. We ate the custom menu. We sat under the floral arches. Thank you to your sister for an incredible afternoon." Victoria tried to delete the comment, but she was too slow. The algorithm caught the engagement and pushed the post higher. A second attendee chimed in. Her name was Elena, a graphic designer I mentored. "I thought it was strange that our corporate gala featured baby-themed pastel floral centerpieces." Elena typed, "Now it makes perfect sense. Your sister is a saint for donating a $65,000 event to local entrepreneurs instead of letting it go to waste. Do not blame the venue for your own family drama." The truth leaked into the public space like a broken dam. My professional network saw the mounting chaos and decided to publicly rally around me. Vendors I had contracted for years added their voices to the digital battlefield. The lead florist from the wholesale market left a comment confirming my name was on the exclusive orchid invoice. The boutique textile merchant verified that I personally authorized the premium upgrade for the silk linens. The receipts were indisputable. They stacked up in the comments section, creating a towering monument of hard evidence that crushed Victoria victim narrative into dust. Her attempt to spin the disaster failed spectacularly against the united front of working women who refused to let an entitled socialite disparage my professional integrity. I watched the notification counter on the video skyrocket. Victoria was losing control of her own page. She could not delete the truth fast enough. Every time she removed one comment, 3 more appeared. Her followers, who had offered sympathy 20 minutes prior, were now reading the detailed accounts of her cruelty. The digital audience watched the golden girl transform from a wronged pregnant woman into a spoiled, manipulative fraud. Then, the fatal blow landed. A prominent local lifestyle influencer who commanded a massive following in the northern New Jersey sector stumbled across the unfolding drama. This specific influencer was the exact type of high society peer Victoria desperately sought to emulate. She was the gatekeeper of the local elite circles. She left a single devastating comment at the top of the feed. "Did not your sister pay for this? Yikes!" That single word carried the weight of a social death sentence. Yikes! It was not anger. It was pity, mixed with profound second-hand embarrassment. It was the ultimate dismissal from the upper echelon of their superficial hierarchy. 3 minutes after that reply surfaced, the video vanished. Victoria panicked and deleted the entire broadcast. She disabled the comment feature across all her photos, effectively silencing her own digital megaphone. She locked her account, turning it from a public showcase into a private, quarantined ghost town. The retreat was absolute. The old conflict was resolved. Victoria's attempt to control the public narrative failed because she fundamentally misunderstood the landscape. She thought she was fighting a battle of optics against a silent sister. She did not realize she was fighting a war of verifiable facts against a legion of independent professionals who held the receipts. I set my tablet face down on the patio table. The warm afternoon breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees in my backyard. A new, terrifying reality now gripped my parents and my sister. They realized they could not bully or PR their way out of this disaster. They had spent their entire lives treating people like disposable commodities, believing their zip code and their curated aesthetic provided a permanent shield against consequences. Now that shield was gone. They had genuinely lost their social standing. The country club board knew the truth. Sylvia and Carter knew the truth. The influential bloggers knew the truth. My family was marooned on an island of their own making, surrounded by a sea of burned bridges. There were no more lies to tell. There were no more checks to write. They were exposed, naked, and shivering in the harsh light of their own arrogance. They were finally beginning to understand the true cost of casting me out. I did not just leave the room. I took the entire foundation with me. The realization that they were totally isolated set the stage for a desperate reckoning. They had nowhere left to turn. The elite peers they worshipped had turned their backs, leaving them with only one door left to knock on, and I held the only key. While my blood relatives remained barricaded inside their sprawling Ridgewood property, consumed by bitter infighting and suffocating social shame, I spent my Sunday evening enveloped in quiet warmth. I chose a secluded upscale bistro nestled in the heart of downtown. The establishment was a sanctuary of dim amber lighting, exposed brick walls, and soft jazz. It lacked the sterile, performative opulence of the Alpine Country Club. There were no gilded mirrors or velvet ropes here. The luxury resided in the authenticity of the experience. The scent of roasted garlic, seared Wagyu beef, and rich reduction sauces lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the bitter toxicity currently suffocating my childhood home. I sat in a curved leather booth, surrounded by the 3 women who formed the actual bedrock of my life. Lauren was my business partner, a razor-sharp logistics director who helped me build our firm from a single folding table into a premier hospitality empire. She was the sister I always needed, possessing a fierce loyalty that never wavered under pressure. Maya and Claire sat across from us. They were independent florists and trusted friends who had stood by me during every grueling vendor negotiation and late-night warehouse inventory. We did not share a last name. We shared a decade of mutual respect, forged in the fires of late nights and relentless ambition. The atmosphere at our table was light, vibrant, and remarkably unburdened. We were not dissecting the digital wreckage of Victoria-deleted videos or agonizing over the local gossip network. We were celebrating the undeniable triumph of the Horizon Foundation event. Maya leaned forward, resting her forearms on the polished mahogany table, detailing how the female entrepreneurs reacted to the grand ballroom. She described the awe on the faces of independent bakers and freelance graphic designers when they walked into a space dripping with rare Venetian silk. These were women who usually operated out of cramped home offices and rented studio spaces. They were accustomed to scraping by on tight margins, always placing their clients first. Maya explained how one young woman, who runs a nonprofit coding academy for girls, started crying when she saw the custom menu and the white orchids. They felt valued, Maya explained, her voice thick with genuine emotion. They felt seen and respected. You gave them a day where they were the VIPs, Miranda. I listened to her recount the afternoon, feeling a deep, radiant warmth settle deep within my chest. I had spent $65,000 expecting to purchase a fleeting moment of approval from a mother and father who viewed me as a utility. Instead, that capital had provided a transformative experience for 100 deserving women. The resources I wasted trying to buy parental affection had finally yielded a return on investment that filled my soul rather than draining it. I was funding inspiration rather than subsidizing arrogance. A waiter approached our booth carrying a silver tray. He set down 4 delicate crystal flutes and poured a chilled vintage champagne. The pale liquid bubbled upward, catching the ambient light of the bistro candles. Lauren picked up her glass, wrapping her long fingers around the slender stem. She did not stand up. She did not tap her silverware against the crystal to demand the attention of the surrounding diners. In our circle, we did not require a captive audience to validate our milestones. We did not need performative applause to know our worth. Lauren looked directly at me. Her gaze was steady, carrying the weight of a woman who knew every sacrifice I had made to keep my business and my sanity intact. She knew the depths of the rejection I had endured from my own bloodline. She raised her glass just a few inches above the table, an intimate gesture of profound solidarity. "To keeping your own energy," Lauren said. Her tone was quiet, a gentle, flawless echo of the very weapon my sister had tried to use against me. "To keeping your own energy." Maya and Claire repeated in unison, their smiles reflecting the candlelight. I lifted my flute. The 4 glasses met in the center of the table with a soft, resonant clink. The sound was small, private, and incredibly powerful. I took a sip of the vintage champagne. The crisp, dry notes danced across my palate. It tasted like pure liberation. As the dinner progressed, a sprawling internal shift crystallized within my mind. For 31 years, I had operated under the agonizing assumption that parental love was a puzzle I simply needed to solve. I believed if I twisted myself into the right shape, if I achieved enough corporate success, if I funded enough extravagant parties, Evelyn and Charles would finally welcome me into their fold. I had treated their conditional affection like a high-stakes negotiation, always offering more capital, always hoping they would eventually sign the treaty. Sitting in that dimly lit bistro, listening to the effortless laughter of my chosen companions, the heavy, lifelong desire for my family acceptance simply evaporated. It did not leave behind a bitter void. It left a sprawling, serene peace. The contrast was undeniable. My parents demanded flawless obedience and pastel compliance in exchange for their toxic tolerance. The women sitting across from me demanded nothing but my authentic presence. They supported my sharp edges. They celebrated my ambition. They did not view my independence as a threat to their vanity. I realized I had spent my entire life starving at a banquet table I had funded myself, while a feast of genuine loyalty was waiting for me outside their gated community. I no longer cared what Charles thought of my tailored suits. I no longer cared if Evelyn found my demeanor too severe for her tennis circle. Their opinions were as empty and worthless as the false benefactor narrative they had tried to sell to the county. The emotional tether connecting me to their approval was permanently severed. I was finally whole, breathing fresh air for the first time in decades. We finished our meal, settling the bill, with a quiet nod to the waitstaff. I hugged Lauren, Maya, and Claire outside the bistro, breathing in the crisp evening air, before walking to my car. The drive back to my residence was a masterclass in tranquility. I rolled the windows down, letting the cool night breeze sweep through the cabin. The digital clock on my dashboard glowed, indicating it was nearing 10 o'clock. I live in a private residential enclave, secured by a stone gatehouse and 24-hour security personnel. It is a quiet neighborhood, favored by executives and professionals who value discretion over flashiness. I approached the illuminated entrance, slowing my vehicle as the wrought iron gates came into view. The gates were closed. This was standard protocol for the late evening hours, but the scene unfolding beneath the harsh halogen security lights was highly irregular. A silver luxury sedan was parked haphazardly on the pristine asphalt, blocking the visitor lane. The engine was still running, casting long exhaust plumes into the cool night air. I recognized the vehicle instantly. It belonged to my father. Charles and Evelyn were standing outside their car, arguing with Marcus, the night shift security guard. My mother wore a rumpled trench coat thrown hastily over her clothes, her hair devoid of its usual flawless blowout. My father was gesturing wildly, pointing a trembling finger at the reinforced glass of the guard booth. The immaculate, unbothered posture they projected to the world was gone. They looked frantic, disheveled, and stripped of their manufactured grace. I pulled my car into the resident lane, rolling to a stop beside the guardhouse. Marcus stepped out of his booth, looking visibly relieved to see my vehicle approach the barricade. "Good evening, Ms. Jane Marcus," said, projecting his voice over the rumble of the idling engines. "These individuals are demanding access to your property. They claim it is a family emergency, but they are not on your authorized visitor list. I informed them they needed to vacate the premises, or I would be forced to contact local authorities." Evelyn rushed toward my car, placing her manicured hands flat against my passenger side window. Her eyes were wide, pleading, and shadowed with a frantic desperation I had never seen her display in public. She tapped frantically on the safety glass, her expensive rings clicking against the pane. "Miranda, please," Evelyn begged, her voice muffled but distinct through the sealed window. "Open the gate. We need to talk to you right now." Carter left. "Sylvia is threatening to pull her investment from your father firm. The country club board is calling an emergency meeting regarding our membership. You have to fix this. You have to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. You have to save us." The new conflict crystallized under the harsh security lights. The architects of my lifelong isolation, realizing they had pushed away their most capable and successful daughter, had arrived unannounced in the middle of the night. The illusion of their superiority was shattered. They were no longer the proud monarchs of the country club. They were socially stranded exiles, standing on the pavement, demanding an audience with the corporate workhorse they had banished just days prior. The trap they built for me had finally snapped shut on their own wrists, and they were begging me to find the key. I did not lower my car window on Sunday night. I kept my hands resting firmly on the leather steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I listened to Evelyn tapping her manicured fingernails against the safety glass, her voice muffled and frantic, but I did not turn my head to acknowledge her presence. The old version of me, the desperate daughter who craved their validation, would have pressed the button. The old Miranda would have listened to their panicked demands, internalized their crisis, and spent the entire night formulating a strategy to save their reputation. But that woman died on the concrete floor of my floral warehouse the moment I received Victoria's text message. I gave Marcus a curt nod. He kept the heavy security barrier firmly in place. I pressed my foot against the accelerator and drove through the resident lane, leaving my parents stranded on the dark pavement, shouting into the empty night. I woke up on Monday morning to a quiet, sunlit house. The sky over northern New Jersey was a brilliant, cloudless expanse of pale blue and gold. I moved through my morning routine with a deliberate, grounding precision. I brewed a shot of dark espresso, the rich, bitter aroma filling the kitchen. I dressed in a tailored navy suit, securing my hair in a sleek, professional knot. Every button I fastened, every piece of fabric I adjusted, felt like putting on a suit of armor. I was preparing for a regular business day at my event design firm, anticipating a morning of vendor meetings and budget reviews. The chaotic emotional fog that had clouded my judgment for 3 decades was gone. It was replaced by a sharp corporate focus. I gathered my leather briefcase, locked my front door, and walked out to my vehicle. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and pine needles. I started the engine, the low hum vibrating through the floorboards, and navigated the winding streets of my gated community toward the main exit. As the stone guardhouse came into view, I saw the silver luxury sedan. Charles and Evelyn had not returned to their sprawling Ridgewood estate. They had either waited through the night or returned at dawn, parking their vehicle illegally along the shoulder of the exit lane. They were waiting to ambush me on my way to the office. When they saw my car approaching the barricade, they stepped out into the middle of the driveway, physically blocking my path to the main road. I brought my vehicle to a stop. I could have instructed Marcus to call the local police. I could have remained inside my locked cabin and waited for security to clear the obstruction. But a true executive does not hide behind glass when delivering a finalized termination. You deliver the news directly, looking the opposing party in the eye, ensuring there is zero room for misinterpretation. I put the transmission into park. I opened my door and stepped out onto the paved driveway. My parents looked haggard. The pristine, unbothered facade they spent a lifetime maintaining was crumbling under the weight of severe social consequence. Charles had dark, heavy circles beneath his eyes. His designer blazer was severely wrinkled, hanging off his shoulders like a borrowed coat. Evelyn clutched her expensive leather purse against her chest. Her makeup smeared her usual flawless blowout, flattened and chaotic. Miranda Charles began his voice hoarse and raw. "Thank God. We have been trying to reach your phone all morning. We need to handle this situation immediately. Carter is currently staying at his parents' house. Sylvia is calling an emergency board meeting at the country club to review our membership status. We are facing a potential expulsion from the club. My management firm is losing clients by the hour. We are facing total ruin. You have to issue a public statement." Evelyn insisted, stepping closer, her tone entirely devoid of anything resembling an apology. "You have to call Thomas Vance and the club president right now. Tell them it was a vendor error. Tell them you made a mistake with the transfer paperwork, and Victoria had nothing to do with it. Tell the local lifestyle blogs that your sister is innocent. We can draft an apology letter for you to sign. You owe us this, Miranda. You cannot just destroy your sister and walk away while our lives fall apart." I stood on the pavement listening to the people who brought me into the world. The emptiness of their values was staggering. They had just lost their son, in-law their pristine reputation, and their elite social standing. Yet they still could not muster a single syllable of genuine remorse for how they treated me. They did not care about the pain they inflicted when they banned me from the family milestone. They did not care about the years of emotional neglect. They only cared about the country club roster and the optics of their wealth. They viewed me, even in their darkest hour, as nothing more than a public relations tool to repair their damaged vanity. I looked at my father and then at my mother. I searched my chest for a trace of sorrow, a flicker of anger, or a lingering desire to fix their broken lives. I found nothing. I felt an expansive, profound peace. "I am not signing anything," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with finality. "I am not calling Thomas. I am not issuing a statement to protect Victoria. The truth is already in the public domain. You built a house out of lies, and now you have to live in the wreckage. But we are your parents, Charles bellowed, the panic returning to his voice, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. You cannot do this to us. We will be ruined. Sylvia is threatening to pull her entire financial portfolio from my management firm today. You've ruined yourselves, I stated. You chose the aesthetic over your own daughter. You chose the lie over the reality. I am no longer your safety net. I am no longer your wallet. I am stepping down from the role of the invisible workhorse. My legal counsel is sending a formal cease and desist letter to your residence this afternoon. You are not to contact my firm, my business partners, or my personal phone ever again. I turned my attention to the security booth. Marcus was standing in the doorway, observing the exchange with quiet, professional discretion. Marcus, I said, projecting my voice clearly over the idling engine of their sedan, please update my residential file. These two individuals are permanently barred from entry. Under no circumstances are they allowed past these gates. If they return to this property, treat them as hostile trespassers and contact the local authorities immediately. Understood, Ms. Jane Marcus replied, stepping back into the booth to log the permanent directive. I turned my back on my parents. I walked toward the driver's side of my vehicle. The heavy metal doorframe felt cool and solid against my fingers. I did not rush. I moved with the calm, deliberate pace of a woman who had just won a war she never wanted to fight. Miranda Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking, echoing off the stone walls of the gatehouse. She realized the finality of the moment. The toxic control she had wielded for 31 years was evaporating right before her eyes. You are abandoning your family. I opened my car door. I paused, resting my hand on the roof of the vehicle. I did not turn around. I did not look over my shoulder to see her tears or witness her despair. I kept my gaze fixed on the bright morning sky stretching out ahead of me. No, I replied, my words hanging in the crisp air with perfect, devastating clarity. I am just matching your aesthetic. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing out the noise of her hysterics. I shifted the car into gear. Marcus raised the security barrier. I drove through the gate, merging onto the main road. The sun was rising higher, casting a brilliant light across the horizon. The toxic cycle was permanently broken. I was driving toward my firm, toward my chosen family, toward a life of profound and enduring liberation. The rearview mirror reflected a shrinking image of my past, fading into the distance until it was gone entirely. The American dream, once rooted in the quiet dignity of hard work and genuine community, has increasingly morphed into a curated exhibition. We have traded the messy, profound reality of human connection for the sterile perfection of a social media grid. Behind the wrought iron gates of our most affluent neighborhoods, a quiet, insidious spiritual decay is taking root. We saw this perfectly illustrated in the story of a self-made woman who watched her family sacrifice their morality on the altar of a country club aesthetic, ultimately forcing her to dismantle the very spectacle she had funded. But this narrative is not merely a satisfying tale of corporate revenge. It is a profound spiritual mirror, reflecting a crisis of values in modern American parenting and the traditional family structure. When viewed through the lens of a spiritual practitioner, one who seeks truth beyond the fleeting illusions of the material world, the tragedy of this family is not that they lost their social standing in a marble lobby. The true tragedy is that they lost their souls long before the baby shower was ever conceived. To build a meaningful life, ancient wisdom teaches us that we must continuously cultivate and correct ourselves from within. This internal cultivation relies on three unshakable pillars: wisdom, morality, and willpower. Wisdom is the ability to perceive reality without the distortion of ego and vanity. Morality is the commitment to treat others with fundamental fairness and inherent dignity, regardless of what they can do for your social standing. Willpower is the resilience to uphold your boundaries and stand by your principles when the world demands compliance. The parents in our story traded these sacred pillars for the hollow currency of optics. They became obsessed with the packaging of their lives while the contents rotted. This is the great spiritual crisis of modern society, the belief that a curated exterior can compensate for a decaying interior. When we lose our spiritual center, we begin to worship the superficial, becoming incapable of recognizing the genuine loyalty of a daughter who builds blinded entirely by the loud, empty demands of a daughter who merely consumes. For parents across America, the message echoing from that shattered ballroom is a desperate plea for a return to genuine family values. Traditional family education is not about orchestrating flawless holiday portraits, securing memberships to exclusive clubs, or ensuring your children fit a soft pastel aesthetic. It is about the quiet, relentless, and often unglamorous work of modeling honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. When parents play favorites, when they shower a superficial, compliant child with unearned praise while treating an independent, capable child as a mere utility, they are committing a profound moral failure. They are not keeping the peace. They are actively funding a domestic war. By shielding a favored child from reality and allowing them to weaponize trendy phrases like "protecting my peace" to justify profound cruelty, parents create a monster of their own design. If we want to raise resilient, decent human beings, we must stop shielding them from the consequences of their own arrogance. True fairness in parenting means validating the child who works, who contributes, and who challenges you to be better, rather than merely elevating the child who reflects your own desperate need for status. When you raise a child to worship status above all else, you raise a tyrant who will eventually turn their entitlement on you. For young people navigating the agonizing realization that their parents might never recognize their true worth, the protagonist's journey is a blueprint for liberation. The message here is profound. Your value is not dictated by those who are spiritually blind to it. In traditional cultures, we are often taught that filial piety and family duty are absolute, unbreakable contracts. But true family duty does not require you to subsidize your own emotional and financial destruction. Young adults must learn to redirect their energy inward, cultivate your own garden, hone your intellect, build your career, and forge your own moral compass. When you focus on self-correction and inner growth, you develop an ironclad willpower. The ultimate victory is not the reallocation of funds or the public exposure of a lie. It is the reclamation of your own spirit. You realize that your intellect and your morality are assets too valuable to waste on people who view you merely as a wallet. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep your toxic family warm. When you stop seeking validation from a broken system, you gain the clarity to build a beautiful life on your own terms. Family is not just a biological accident. It is an active, daily choice of mutual respect. Surround yourself with the people who celebrate your strength, not the ones who are intimidated by it. Stories like this resonate deeply because they tear down the polite fictions we use to survive our own family dinners. They remind us that the journey to self-worth often requires walking through the darkest parts of our own bloodlines, holding nothing but a match and the truth. If you find value in these reflections and want to explore more narratives that challenge the status quo, vindicate the unseen, and expose the reality behind closed doors, make sure to subscribe and follow Morning Revenge. We are building a community of truth seekers who refuse to stay silent in the shadows of toxic family dynamics. As we reflect on the shattered illusions of this story, we must confront a philosophical truth that violently opposes conventional American wisdom. We are conditioned from birth to believe that family is forever, that blood is thicker than water, and that preserving the family unit is the highest moral imperative, regardless of the personal cost. This is a dangerous, soul-crushing fallacy. Sometimes the most profound act of love and moral clarity you can offer a toxic family is absolute, unapologetic abandonment. By staying, by absorbing their insults, smoothing over their mistakes, and paying their debts, you do not heal them. You merely finance their spiritual decay. Refusing to save your parents from the consequences of their own actions is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate necessary reality check. It offers them the only thing that could ever wake them up, the devastating gift of facing themselves in the mirror. True enlightenment and emotional maturity occasionally demand that we let the structure collapse. You cannot heal a diseased tree by painting its dying leaves green. Sometimes you must simply walk out of the forest. The people who share your DNA are not a binding contract. They are merely your starting line. Where you finish is entirely up to you. Are you currently watering a garden that was designed to choke you? Or are you brave enough to finally drop the watering can and let the drought reveal the truth?